Hello everyone. So today we're gonna write a simple but very functional DI container in JavaScript. From scratch, in 1 hour, we will have a fully functional DI container. I found it very fun to do and very interesting to do. I previously thought that DI containers are complicated things, that there's a lot of fancy stuff going on under the hood. And once in my work I needed to write a DI container, I decided, what if I go test first and just see what's coming out of this? And it appeared it was very fun, and right now I'm already prepared. I wrote it before and I know what to write. But initial version of the DI container was created in about 1 hour and a half. And I can show it to you in just 1 hour. So, okay, so let's get started. First I will start the timer. Here I prepared the list of tests, which is effectively the list of features that I want to implement. And I have already set up the environment for the development, so I can basically go quickly. And it's just very simple. So here I have Jasmine tests, and here I'm going to write the container code. So the first feature I'm going to implement is very simple. The container should resolve an instance from instance registration. So I ought to be able to register the instance of a class in the container and resolve it using a name. So let's write this test. So what I'm going to do is create a container, and then I'm going to call the register instance function and pass it a name and the instance of the class. Sure thing, I have to create that instance, and I expect that when I call container resolve, passing in the name, I will get this instance back. Very simple. So it will fail horribly, and to make it pass, first I need the container. So I'm declaring the container constructor, and next I'm gonna need the register instance method. Register instance is just a function that accepts the name and the instance. Okay, next I need the resolve function. This.resolve is a function that accepts name. Now, what's the simplest thing I can do to make this test pass? It's returning me an undefined. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say something like this. Instance. I'm going to have the registrations. Which is just an object. And in the registrations, with a name, I'm going to pass an instance in here. And to resolve it, well, I should return registrations name. This will make my test pass. Let's see. Yeah, it passed. Now, the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to my container should resolve instance from factory registration. What that means is that I ought to be able to register the factory in my container, and in order to create the instance, the container will invoke the factory function that I will pass it in to the registration. So it looks like this. A service, I'll still have an instance, but and I still need the container for this. And what I'm going to say is container.register factory with the name service, but in this time it will be a function that returns return an instance, returns a service. And I expect that when I call the container.resolve with the name service, I will get back my service through the factory function. This will obviously fail because I don't have the register factory method. Well, let's add one. And what I can do here is just add that factory to registrations. And when resolving, if registrations is if the type of registrations is a function, then I will return the result of that function. Result of the call to that function, and that will make my test pass. Now, what I don't like here, I don't like that if statement here. It's like polluting everything. What if I do a simple trick instead of if? When registering instance, what if my registrations will all be factories that I can call and get the required instance back? Well, it's pretty simple to do. Instead of registering instance, I will convert this instance into a factory function. And then that implies that all my registrations are now factory functions. My tests are still passing. So now, the next feature will be, I don't think there's anything more to refactor except that I would like to have this variable container in here, so I don't repeat myself, and before each test I will create it. That saves me a bit. So here is it. Now, okay, so it's cleaned up. Now we can move further. Should resolve instance from constructor registration. What is this? Well, I want to be able to register the constructor in my container, as opposed to factory function that needs to be called to get the instance. The constructor needs to be called with the new keyword. So let's say that I have the constructor, my service, the constructor function, and I will give it a name to distinguish it, my service. So when I do container register type, I pass in the name and the constructor function, and I expect that container.resolve service will return me my service class with the name equal my service. Well, let's see what happens. Object does not support property or method registered type. That's because I have not declared it here. And it's the function that accepts the name and a constructor as its arguments. And what I should add to registrations? Well, to the registrations, I should add a factory function that will just call the constructor with the new keyword. I think that's enough. Well, it will not just call, it will return this thing. Lovely. Now everything is still passing. Well, okay, this feature, I think it is done. It resolved the constructor. So now another feature that I would like to do is to implement the Singleton pattern in my container. So it should resolve a singleton from instance registration. Well, in fact, this is somewhat redundant test, but I prefer to write it because it has the meaning, it describes the feature, and it might have the same setup as this when I'm trying to resolve an instance, but expectations are a little bit different. I will call container resolve twice for result 1 and result 2. And I expect that result 1 to be result 2. And this test will obviously fail. Why it will fail? So I'm doing a register instance of my service, and I'm doing a result 1, the result 2, and object doesn't support property or method undefined. Where is it? On line 18, registrations, name. Oh, I'm doing the resolution with an empty name. Okay. So this test will pass. It will pass because I'm already having only one instance. But the next one is rather interesting. It should resolve singleton from factory registration. That's interesting. So I need to have the factory, which is a function that returns just a new object every time. And when I do container register factory, what I'm expecting here is to be the same result. So yeah, although factory creates different instances, the container, once it will call factory, it should return in the same instance again and again and again. How do I say that I want to register a factory? Well, let's say it will be a singleton. Or rather, instead of spreading these strings, I want to say container dot singleton. Okay, how do I do this? Well, the register factory is a what if I'm accepting here a strategy. Yeah, how do I resolve my instances? And this strategy is called singleton. Well, okay, so what could it be? What could it possibly be? Well, what if this will not be just a constant string or something? What if this will be a constructor for the strategy that will construct me a strategy that I can save to registrations as the resolution strategy, and I can use it right here by calling that strategy? Well, okay, so let's declare it first. A container.singleton is well, I didn't actually check that my test fails. Well, okay, it fails. It fails because it's returning any different instances. To make it more clear, I can add something like this. And we'll see that it fails because there's two different instances. Okay. Now, about that singleton. Container.singleton. Well, it will be a constructor that accepts, what do you know, registration. So I'm creating a registration and passing it to the resolution strategy. And the singleton strategy will look something like this. It will have the resolve method. And what it will do is it will, if it already resolved the instance, it will return an instance. And I need to declare instance variable here. Otherwise, I can just call the registration directly. My registrations are all factory functions, and return instance after this. Now I have to apply that strategy. In order to apply that strategy, I need to do something like this. I'm going to say that this is the new strategy, and I will pass it a registration to the constructor, which is a factory, effectively. And also, I want, although this will make this test pass, it's not resolving a singleton. That's because I'm gonna call the resolve here, and if I call the resolve here, it will break a lot of tests. That's because all my registrations should be strategies, and that implies that I have to have the default strategy that I can pass in a registration, and its resolve function will do this. It will just call the registration factory function, and now I have to apply this in here. So I could say something like new container.default strategy and pass in this function. And I'm doing it here, but if no strategy is provided, then I have to use the strategy provided or container.default strategy, or the default strategy. Yeah, and in the registered type I have to do the same thing. I will call a new default strategy a default strategy and passing this function, this factory function. And this makes my tests pass. Well, lovely. And next what I'm going to do is to have a singleton from when I'm registering the constructor. And so so in order to do this, I will have a different setup. The setup for I will register my service as a type, and I will add the instance ID to see if this is the same instances or not. So this is my service. It has a name, it has an instance ID, and I'm registering it as a type. But my expectation is still the same. My expectation is that when I call the resolve twice, I will have the same instance. And this test will fail. It will fail because there are different instances, and I can make it pass by accepting a strategy parameter here and passing it in here that I'm expecting the container singleton. Passing in strategy here and applying the same thing. A strategy is a strategy or default if not specified, and I can call this a new strategy here. And that will make my test pass. Now, notice that I'm testing in both Internet Explorer and Chrome to see if it works equally well for any browser, for any of these browsers at least. So now, the next feature I have, where we are, the 20 minutes passed. almost, and we have register instance, register factory, and register type, and we have the resolution of the classes of the dependencies by names, and we also implemented the singleton pattern so that we could specify the strategy. And the next feature I'm going to implement is the hierarchical container. So what's the hierarchical container? Well, the hierarchical container is the container that can have children, and if I'm resolving the dependency through the child container, then I can either, if the dependency is registered in the child container, I get that. I'm resolving that registration. If it's not registered, then the child container will go to the parent container to resolve that instance, the instance of this dependency. And what else? If dependency is registered in both child and parent container, the child container overrides the parent's registration, and basically that's it. And of course, if the parent does not have registration but the child has registration, and I'm resolving through the child, I will get the instance. If I'm resolving through the parent, I will get an exception. Okay, so let's write this test. It should resolve from parent container. How do I test this? Well, let's say that I'm saying that container create a child, and a child, first thing I want to test is that child is actually wired to the parent container. So when I'm asking it to resolve something that is not registered directly in the child container, it will go to the parent container. So that's what I'm going to test here. So I'm taking the child container, but before taking the child, I'm going to say I'm going to register in the parent, or let's say it will be instance, and I'm going to create that instance, obviously, and pass it here. And I expect that when I call child resolve service, I will get the instance from the parent container. Okay. This test will fail, obviously, for the obvious reason. First of all, I don't have the create child method at all. Well, let's create it. And the create child will return me a new container. Now I have a problem. The result of undefined or null reference. Why is it? Well, that's because my registrations does not contain the name I'm asking, and this will return me undefined or null. And when I'm trying to invoke the resolve on it, it will fail horribly. To make it pass, let's say that I'm passing in what? Let's pass in the parent container, which is self. Now, since I have reference to a parent container, when I'm resolving, I can say something like this. If I have a parent, then I will return a parent.resolve. Yeah, otherwise I will. And this will make my test pass or not. Let's see. If I have a parent, then yeah, create child is child resolve to be a service, and a resolve, and the name. Oh, I'm not passing in the name here. That's it. This will make my test pass, yes. So I'm resolving by name from parent container if I have a parent. Otherwise, I will try to resolve from myself. So now, while writing this, I noticed that it's not very handy to have this cannot invoke resolve on null or undefined or something like this. I would like to have some error message that tells me that I'm trying to resolve what I have not registered. So it should throw, if the container should throw an exception if it has no registration. And well, it's a very simple test. I expect that function that will call container.resolve with some unknown, for some unknown, I expect that function to throw an error with the message missing registration for unknown. Okay, good. This test will fail, yeah, because it threw an exception. It did throw an exception, but the exception wasn't able to get properly resolved when defined, instead of saying something more informative. So let's say if okay, I will return something if registrations has own property name. Otherwise, I will throw an error saying what it should say, missing registration for a name. And this will make my test pass. Okay, lovely. Halfway there. We still have a lot of things to do, but a lot of things already done. So that's it. And the next test is that the child container should override parent registrations. That's what I'm going to test here. So that's the case when I have something registered both in child and in the parent. And what I also want to test, well, I have three cases. Like there are registrations in the parent but not in the child. There are registrations in the child but not in the parent. And there are registrations both in the child and the parent containers. So that's the case when I have both. Well, I've tested when I have a parent registration but not child. I was occasionally deleted this one. So it should not resolve from parent container own registrations. That means that it should not go to the parent container if it has the registration, and the parent probably not. So it implies the order of checking the registrations. Well, okay, so what I'm going to do here is pretty much the same as I was doing, but instead of saying that I'm going to register instance into a parent container, I'm going to register instance in a child container, and I expect it to resolve correctly, but it fails with the error missing registration for service, and that is because it's checking the parent container first before checking own registrations, which is wrong. So we'll fix that test by changing the order of checking, and it makes my test pass. Now, what I'm going to do is to check the case when I have both registrations. When I have registration of the service in the child and in the parent, and it should override, which means I will register two different instances, one instance in the child container, one instance in the parent container, and I should get the correct instances depending on who I am asking to resolve. So I will duplicate that service. I have service 1 and a service 2, and in a container I will register instance with the same name, service, but it will be a service 1. And I'm going to add the instance IDs here just to see if anything goes wrong. Okay, lovely. And in the child container, I'll move it a bit here. And in the child container, I'm going to register the instance with the same name, but it will be a service 2. And I will have two expectations. First, I expect that container.resolve service will give me a service 1, while a child resolved service will give me a service 2. And I believe this test will pass. Yeah, because it's already working. This functionality is already working. It's already there. I'm just doing the two things. I'm just testing the cases. Somewhat redundant test, but I feel the need to write it. So the last feature that I want to, and this will be the big one, and we have only half an hour to go, but this feature will be really the big one, and will because I'm feeling confident. I'm feeling confident in what I'm doing, and I think that I can cover what I'm going to write with a single test, and I will cover a lot of ground, but it should work. When I was first developing this container, my first approach was I wrote several tests for this recursive dependency resolution. What I mean by recursive dependency resolution is that if you look at the code already written, especially in the register type where I'm passing in the constructor, my constructor can have an arguments, and I want, well, as the DI containers do, if my constructor has an arguments, they will have to go and resolve me these arguments in order to invoke my constructor that I've passed. And in order to do this, I have to have some mechanism to declare that my constructor needs some dependencies with some names. And this is what I came up with. So let's start writing this test. First of all, let's create some class structure that I'm going to pass in the container. Let's say that we have a service 1. It's a constructor, and let's give it a name, service 1. And let's say that we have a service 2. Let's give it a name. Let's also say that we have a client, and the client requires service 1 and a service 2 as its dependencies. And in the client, since this is the test code, I can turn the client to the mock object that will not only be used in the test, manipulated by the production code, but it will have own expectations written inside of it. So, what I'm expecting here? Well, I expect that when the client constructor will be invoked in the container, that the service 1 will be an instance whose name is service 1. And I expect that the service 2 will be an instance whose name is with the name of a service 2. That's my expectations for the constructor when the container will invoke that constructor. The last thing to do is to let container know that I actually need to resolve some dependencies. And I came up with a very simple thing to do. I will declare a imports static variable in the client class that will just name the dependencies that I'm required in an array, and the order of these dependencies will match the order of the arguments in the constructor. So now I'm gonna say that container that register type is service1, and I'm going to register both of my services. And what I'm going to also do is to register the client. Register client here. And I also will give it a name. So, well, and I expect that container.resolve client will return me a client with the name of client. But what it will also do, it will invoke this constructor, and here I have also two expectations that the container will pass me in the two instances of the services that I expect. It will resolve this service1 and service2 here to the correct instances, so it will create that instance. Well, that checks that I'm parameterizing constructor. But it doesn't actually check that any recursiveness here happens. In order to check the recursiveness, I'm going to add a service 3. Let's give it a name, and I will accept it here. And here I expect service 3.name to be service 3. Well, at least it gives me some check for recursiveness. So when the container will be resolving in client 1, it will try to resolve the dependency by the name stated in imports, and it will resolve me the service 1. When it will try to resolve me a service 2, it will resolve the dependency by name service 2, and the service 2, well, it requires a service 3. So then the container will go to try to resolve the service 2. It will find that it requires the service 3, and it will basically resolve the service 3 also. So I'm registering all of this in the container, and by invoking the resolve function, I actually go and start this resolution process. I'm able to get property name of undefined or null reference. Well, that's simple. It fails right over here because the container does not pass me any arguments. So now, how do I want to do this? Well, this applies only to the register type function. This applies only to resolving with a constructor. Now, this function over here invokes the constructor, but it's not passing anything to its arguments. And in order to pass something to its arguments, I'm going to use the very handy function in the JavaScript called bind. What bind does is it prepares my function and it fills in the arguments in this function. So the bind returns me a function with the field pre-filled in arguments, and I can call this function without any arguments later. And and I will have the arguments passed in that function. So let's say that I will create, well, I will pass this constructor to some function, that I will call satisfy imports and this function will return me a prepared constructor that I can call without any arguments. So that's my function, satisfy imports. Now, there's a constructor. And the simplest case is, since I'm passing every single constructor here, is that if a constructor imports, if the constructor does not have any imports, I'm just returning a constructor himself, so it doesn't require anything. If the constructor has imports, well, that's an interesting thing. Now I have to satisfy that import. And remember that imports are just an array of the names of the dependencies. And I can call the resolve method with this name. So, I can have the constructor arguments as an array if I call constructor imports.map, and I will map it to the resolve function of the container itself. So I'm taking all the imports and one by one I'm resolving them from the container. Now I'm going to say constructor.bind, and the bind is in the function prototype, and it accepts several arguments. Well, it accepts a very variable number of arguments. First one is this argument. Second one is arguments that will be passed to the function. In our case, it's the constructor. But it accepts the variable number of arguments. But I have all the arguments in this array. In order to do this, I will have to call another function that is called apply. And the apply function accepts the this argument and the array of arguments to be passed to the bind function. Yeah. So apply itself, I'm going to do the apply on the constructor function. So its context will be a constructor function, and I'm passing in constructor arguments. But remember that the constructor arguments is not only the arguments for the constructor. Now this arguments is also the arguments to the bind function, and the first argument should be this. So what I'm going to do is place an object to be a first in the constructor arguments, and this object will become the context of execution of the constructor, which will be executed on the new object. So let's see how that works. Well, it doesn't work, yeah? Well, it doesn't work, and it fails in here. When I'm calling the new constructor, it says object does not support this action. Yeah, because, well, actually I'm not returning anything from the satisfy imports function. And this makes my tests pass. So now let's recap what we have done just now. So we have basically implemented the whole container. Look at its size. Look at this. It's 57 lines long, and well, with a bit of refactoring, I can make it even shorter. But look at what it does. it does a lot of things. Well, it's resolving in instances, registered as an instance, a singleton, through the factory, through the registered type. It resolving it by using the constructor. It has the support for singletons. It has the support for hierarchical containers. You can create a child containers and have a hierarchy of these containers. And it also supports the recursive dependency resolution. It can resolve dependencies recursively. That's what we did here. And we have the 15 minutes left. And well, I think that's enough. Well, I can add some more fancy features to this container. Like, for example, I would like to pass the container to the factory function. When I'm invoking this factory, so that just the factory function can use the container to resolve any dependencies it needs. I can, for example, break this test into several tests to do some more elaborate things, like testing that some of the dependencies that I can use the child container and hierarchical container with this recursive dependency resolution. Writing those tests will increase my confidence in the code, but I'm pretty much confident that they will all pass, so there's nothing I can write more to, there's no failing tests I can write to check the new functionality, actually. So that's it. We have implemented the DI container for the JavaScript in 1 hour from scratch, driven by tests. Just notice this, we were writing it test first, and well, you can use it in your projects if you want. It's open, and you can find. I will put the link to the GitHub repository where this container is already implemented, and you can grab it, and it has more fancy features in there. It can, for example, work with the module loaders like require.js, or it can work with the Node.js or with the common.js loader. So you can find the source codes on the GitHub. Check this out; they're very interesting, and you can find how these things are set up for testing. And also, well, you're welcome to leave any comments, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and not to miss the new exciting videos. Well, and thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you really enjoyed this with me, and see you on the next videos. Thanks for watching again. Bye.